Backdate the certificate, Maya, or clear your desk. Those were the first words Evan Cross said to me after he became Chief Operating Officer of Halcyon Financial Systems, and for a second I honestly thought he was testing me. I was 29 years old, 7 years into a career in cybersecurity compliance, and responsible for the final security attestation on the largest contract Halcyon had ever negotiated. A 7-year, $3.6 billion payment processing migration for National Meridian Bank. The deal had taken 11 months, 3 external audits, thousands of pages of documentation, and more weekends than I cared to count. There was one problem left. At 2:17 that morning, our penetration testing team had discovered an authentication flaw in one of the recovery tools scheduled to go live with the first migration wave. It was fixable. My engineers estimated 48 hours. But until it was fixed and retested, I could not legally attest that the environment matched the control report we had given National Meridian. Evan had arrived at Halcyon less than a week earlier after spending most of his career at a venture fund his father had partly financed. His father, Charles Cross, had founded Halcyon 26 years before, and the board had just approved Evan as COO, despite the fact that he had never run a regulated technology operation. That morning was his first executive meeting. He walked into the conference room wearing a navy suit, set his phone beside my testing report, and asked why the certificate had not been uploaded. I explained the failed control. He barely looked at the report. "The bank's team is landing in 40 minutes, he said. "We announced the deal at noon, fix the date, sign the form, and run the retest after closing." I told him I would not. He leaned back, almost amused. My fiancé, Daniel, sat 2 seats away. Daniel was a product director at Halcyon, and we had been engaged for 8 months. He knew exactly what my signature meant. He had heard me explain it over dinner more times than either of us could count. I looked at him, expecting him to say something, but he lowered his eyes to his laptop. Evan tapped the certificate with one finger. "You're confusing compliance with authority," he said. "I'm the COO. I'm telling you the risk is acceptable." I told him calmly, "You can accept business risk. You cannot change whether a test passed." The room went silent. Evan's face tightened. "Then I need someone in your seat who understands business." I closed the folder. "If you want a false attestation, that person won't be me." He stood up. "Fine. Security will collect your badge. Effective immediately, you're terminated for insubordination." Daniel still said nothing. That hurt more than Evan's words. 10 minutes later, I was walking toward the lobby with my laptop already disabled and a facilities employee carrying a cardboard box containing a framed picture of my grandmother, a coffee mug my team had given me, and a pair of running shoes I kept under my desk. I was angry, but underneath the anger was something colder. I knew the contract. National Meridian had insisted on a named control provision after 2 vendors had misrepresented testing results during previous technology projects. Section 14.3 listed me as Halcyon's designated security attestation officer for the initial migration. If I left before final approval, National Meridian's risk committee had to reopen the review. They could replace me eventually, but they could not erase the failed test or substitute another signature that morning. Evan had not read that section. Daniel had. When the elevator opened into the lobby, I saw National Meridian's delegation coming through the revolving doors. At the center was Dana Whitmore, the bank's chief risk officer, a 58-year-old former federal examiner who had spent the past year challenging every assumption I made and respecting me every time I produced evidence instead of excuses. She saw the box in my arms before she saw the security guard beside me. "Maya?" she said. "Why are you carrying your office?" Before I could answer, Evan came out of the executive elevator behind me with Daniel and Halcyon's general counsel. His smile returned instantly. "Dana, welcome. We had a small personnel transition this morning, but everything is on schedule." Dana looked from him to me. "Personnel transition?" Evan said. "Maya is no longer with Halcyon. I'll have another executive sign the security attestation so we can keep the closing on time." Dana did not raise her voice. That was what made the moment so sharp. She opened the binder her lawyer was carrying and turned to a tab. "You mean the attestation required under Section 14.3? Evan's smile faded. Dana continued. The one tied to the named officer who personally supervised the control testing? Evan glanced toward General Counsel. Dana looked at me. Did the environment pass last night? I said. No. Recovery authentication failed at 2:17 a.m. Engineering believes the flaw is repairable, but I would not certify it until we had a clean retest. Dana closed the binder. Then there is nothing to sign today. Evan stepped forward. Dana, this is a minor technical issue. Maya was being unnecessarily rigid. Dana finally looked directly at him. Your former employee just refused to misrepresent a failed security control to one of the largest banks in the country, and your response was to fire her 20 minutes before asking me for $3.6 billion in business. The lobby became so quiet that I could hear the security gate clicking behind us. She handed the binder back to her attorney. National Meridian is pausing final approval. Our risk committee will reopen the vendor review immediately. Evan went pale. You can't delay the entire program over one employee, Dana answered. I'm not delaying it over an employee. I'm delaying it over what your decision tells me about your controls. Then she turned to me and said, Maya, I'm sorry about your morning. I nodded, shifted the box against my hip, and walked through the revolving doors without looking back. My phone buzzed before I reached the corner. It was Daniel. His message was short. I think we should postpone the wedding. You forced this into a crisis, and I can't risk my career getting pulled into it. I stood at the curb reading those words twice. In less than an hour, the company I had protected for 7 years had fired me for telling the truth, and the man who planned to marry me had decided that protecting his title mattered more than protecting me. For the first time that morning, my hands shook. Then I put the phone in my purse, hailed a cab, and went home. That evening, I drove 45 minutes west to my mother and stepfather's house in Naperville because some habits take longer to break than relationships. Whenever something went wrong, I went there. My mother had spent years telling me that family was the one place where I never had to prove myself, and even though experience had given me reasons to question that, part of me still wanted to believe her. I had also been helping them financially for 4 years. My stepfather's construction business had collapsed after a partner walked away with unpaid tax obligations, and my mother had reduced her nursing hours after knee surgery. I covered part of their mortgage and health insurance, about $2,700 a month. I told myself it was temporary, even after temporary stretched into 48 months. My younger brother, Trevor, lived 5 miles away and owned a small cloud services company called Northline Systems. He was smart and charismatic, but impatient. He loved the announcement more than the execution. 6 months earlier, Northline had been shortlisted as a subcontractor on the National Meridian migration. I disclosed our relationship immediately and removed myself from the vendor selection. I had never voted on his company, never reviewed his pricing, and never promised him work. My family heard only one thing. A contract worth several $1,000,000 might be coming. When I opened my mother's front door that night, I heard glasses clinking in the dining room. Trevor was there with his wife, my mother, my stepfather, and Daniel. For a moment, I stopped in the hallway because I could not understand why my fiancé, who had just postponed our wedding by text, was sitting at my mother's table drinking wine. Then Trevor raised his glass and said, "There she is." No one stood up. My mother looked irritated rather than concerned. "Maya, Daniel told us what happened. We've been trying to figure out how to fix this." I looked at Daniel. "You came here before you came home?" He rubbed his jaw. "I thought everyone needed to talk before you made things worse." Trevor leaned forward. "Evan called me. National Meridian froze all vendor onboarding, including Northline. I've got 23 employees and a leased data center sitting idle because you decided to make a point." I asked him if Evan had told him why the bank paused approval. Trevor waved the question away. "Because you wouldn't sign a form," I said. "Because the system failed a security test." My stepfather sighed. "Every system has bugs, Maya. You fix bugs. You don't blow up a $3 billion deal." I corrected him automatically. 3.6. My mother slapped her napkin onto the table. "That attitude is exactly the problem. You always have to be right about every detail. Sometimes adults compromise. I stared at her. You want me to falsify a security certification for a bank? She shook her head. I want you to stop making everything sound criminal. Daniel says Evan would bring you back if you apologized and agreed to work with the new leadership. I turned to Daniel. His face told me before his mouth did. He had already discussed my job with Evan. You talked to him? I asked. Daniel said, I was trying to protect us. He said this can still be repaired if you admit you overreacted. I almost laughed. I was fired for refusing to sign something that wasn't true. Daniel leaned toward me. You were fired because you challenged the COO in front of half the leadership team. There it was. Not the security test, not the false date, not the risk to millions of bank customers. Hierarchy. I looked around the table and realized every person there was measuring my morning by what it had cost them. Trevor's subcontract, Daniel's career, my mother's financial stability, my stepfather's mortgage. No one had asked whether I was all right. Then Trevor said something that changed the entire conversation. You don't understand how much we have riding on this. I asked what he meant. He looked at my mother, and she looked away. My stepfather finally said, we helped Trevor expand so he could handle the National Meridian work. I felt my stomach tighten. How? My mother answered quietly. We refinanced the house. Trevor jumped in. It wasn't reckless. Northline was on the preferred list. I needed servers, staff, and compliance insurance before onboarding. You know how enterprise contracts work. I did know. That was why I asked, did you sign a final subcontract? Silence. Trevor's eyes moved toward his wineglass. Not final, no, but Evan told me it was basically done. I asked how much my parents had borrowed. My stepfather said, 180,000. I had to put both hands on the back of a chair. They had borrowed against the house while I was paying part of the mortgage, then given the money to my brother based on a contract that did not exist. Trevor said, which is why you need to stop being stubborn. Go back tomorrow, apologize, sign the certificate after they patch the issue, and this all moves forward. I said, if they patch it and it passes, someone qualified can sign a current certificate. I will not backdate one. My mother's expression hardened. So you're willing to let your brother lose his company and let us lose this house over your pride? Something inside me became very still. No, I said. You borrowed against your house without telling me. Trevor spent money against a contract he never had. Evan fired the officer who refused to lie to a bank. Those are your decisions. My stepfather stood. Don't talk to your mother that way in our house. I looked around the dining room. At the new light fixture I had paid to replace. At the insurance bill sitting beneath a bowl on the sideboard. At Daniel sitting beside my brother as if they had formed a committee to manage me. You're right, I said. It is your house, which means the mortgage is your responsibility too. My mother stared at me. What is that supposed to mean? I picked up my purse. The automatic transfer I make every month ends tonight. I'll cover your insurance through the end of this quarter so you have time to adjust. After that, you and my stepfather handle your own bills. Trevor stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. You can't do that now. I looked at him. I can because it's my money. Daniel followed me into the hallway. Maya, don't turn this into revenge. I opened the front door. I'm not taking anything from anyone. I'm just not carrying people who keep telling me I'm the problem. He said my name again, but I stepped outside, got into my car, and drove home. I slept in my own bed that night. I cried for maybe 20 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and wrote down every financial obligation, every account, every shared payment, every beneficiary designation, every password, and every place where someone else's comfort depended on me staying quiet. By midnight, I knew exactly what I was going to change, and none of it required destroying anybody. The next morning, Dana Whitmore called me at 8:06. She did not offer me a revenge plan, a blank check, or control of my old company. She asked if I was willing to meet for coffee. We sat in a hotel cafe near the river with National Meridian's Deputy General Counsel present, and Dana explained that the bank's risk committee had ordered an independent review of Halcyon's security program. Because I was now a former employee, they could not ask me for proprietary documents, confidential reports, or internal emails, and I told them I would not provide any. What I could confirm was simple. A test had failed. I had refused to certify it as passed, and I had been fired immediately afterward. Dana thanked me, then surprised me. "I've wanted you on my side of the table for 2 years," she said. "I never approached you because you were leading a live vendor negotiation with us. That conflict ended yesterday. Legal has cleared us to talk." The position was Director of Third-Party Cyber Risk, reporting directly to her, with responsibility for reviewing the bank's largest technology vendors. It paid more than Halcyon had paid me, but what mattered more was that I would never again be asked to pretend risk disappeared because an executive found it inconvenient. I asked for 2 days to think. Dana smiled. "That's another reason I want you. People who say yes too quickly usually haven't read what they're agreeing to." I accepted 48 hours later. Daniel moved out of our apartment that same weekend. We had both paid rent, so I did not throw his belongings into the hallway or change the locks. I made an inventory, agreed on a pickup time, and had my sister-in-law from a cousin's side of the family sit with me while he collected his things. Daniel kept trying to turn the conversation into a debate about whether I understood the pressure he had been under. Finally, I said, "You were allowed to be scared. You weren't allowed to decide my integrity was negotiable because your boss scared you." He asked whether the engagement was really over. I looked at the ring on my hand, removed it, and placed it in his palm. "You ended it in an elevator," I told him. "I'm just respecting your decision. That Monday I started at National Meridian. I made one rule for myself before I entered the building. I was not going to use my new position to punish Halcyon, Daniel, Trevor, or anyone else. If Halcyon fixed its controls and earned approval, I would sign off on the review like any other vendor. If Trevor's company met the subcontractor requirements, I would recuse myself again. If my mother needed a doctor or an emergency ride, I was still her daughter. But I was done converting love into recurring payments. For the first few weeks, I heard almost nothing from Halcyon. Then one of my former analysts, Sophie, called me from her personal phone. She sounded frightened. She said Evan had ordered the security team to recreate the failed test in a new environment and record only the passing result, then classify the original failure as development noise. I stopped her before she could send me anything. "Do not send me files," I said. "Do not forward email. Use Halcyon's ethics hotline, and if you believe records are being altered, call outside counsel or the regulator listed in your policy." She whispered, "What if they fire me too?" I told her, "I can't promise what they'll do. I can promise that deleting evidence will make this worse." 2 days later, Halcyon's audit committee announced it had retained independent counsel. A week after that, National Meridian formally extended the vendor pause. Around the same time, Trevor called me at midnight. His voice was no longer angry. He said Northline's line of credit had been frozen because National Meridian onboarding was suspended, and his lender wanted proof of contracted revenue. "Can you tell the bank the project is still coming?" he asked. I said I could not. He said, "You don't have to guarantee anything. Just say it's likely." I told him, "I don't know that it's likely." He went quiet, then admitted something I had not known. In the financing package he had given the lender, he had included an investor presentation stating that family leadership inside Halcyon Compliance made approval of Northline's subcontract highly probable. He had used my position as part of his credibility without asking me. I closed my eyes. "Trevor, you need a lawyer and a restructuring advisor tomorrow morning." He became angry again. "I need my sister." I said, "Your sister is telling you to get professional help before you make this worse." My mother called immediately afterward and begged me to reinstate the monthly mortgage transfer. I asked whether she and my stepfather had met with the financial counselor whose number I sent them. She said they had not. They were waiting for the Halcyon deal to recover. I told her, "Then please stop waiting." She accused me of becoming cold. That hurt. but I did not change the transfer. For years, every emergency in my family had ended when I paid it. For the first time, the emergency had to continue long enough for the people who created it to make a plan. 3 months later, I walked into a National Meridian vendor review and saw Evan Cross sitting on the opposite side of the table. It was the first time we had been in the same room since he fired me. His father sat beside him, along with Halcyon's outside counsel, a new chief information security officer, and 2 members of the company's audit committee. Daniel was not there. He had resigned 6 weeks earlier, according to a public staffing notice, after being interviewed during the internal review. Dana sat at the head of our side of the table. I sat 2 seats down with the independent technical report open in front of me. No one had brought me into the meeting for theater. I was there because I now led the bank team responsible for evaluating Halcyon's remediation. The difference mattered to me. I did not own Halcyon. I could not fire Evan. I could not seize anyone's office or order security to drag people outside. I could ask questions, examine evidence, and make a recommendation backed by the contract. That was enough. Evan looked thinner than I remembered. When our eyes met, he gave me a tight smile. "Maya, I'm glad you landed well," I said. "Good morning, Evan." Then the review began. Halcyon's new security chief walked us through the remediation. The original authentication flaw had been fixed within 36 hours, exactly as my team had predicted. If Evan had simply waited, the technical problem would have been a footnote. The real issue was what happened afterward. Independent counsel had found that someone in executive management instructed employees to alter the testing timeline, relabel the original failure, and prepare a certification packet that would have made it appear the system had passed before the scheduled closing. The evidence included version histories, meeting notes, and messaging records preserved by Halcyon's own retention system. Evan's lawyer argued that the instructions had been misunderstood. Dana let him finish. Then she looked at me. "Maya, do you have anything on technical remediation?" I did. I spent 12 minutes asking the new security chief about the control changes, access restrictions, testing independence, and audit logging. His answers were solid. I told Dana that the technology itself now met the required standard. Evan's shoulders visibly loosened. He thought he had survived. Then Dana asked, "And governance?" I closed the technical report and opened the independent counsel summary. "The repaired system is not the reason I recommend against reinstating approval today," I said. Evan's smile disappeared. "The issue is that Halcyon's control process failed when an executive tried to override it. The evidence shows the company did not have an effective mechanism to prevent that executive from pressuring staff after the designated officer refused to sign. Until the board can demonstrate that compliance decisions are insulated from commercial retaliation, we would be relying on individual courage instead of institutional control." Charles Cross looked slowly toward his son. Evan leaned forward. "This is personal." I shook my head. "If it were personal, I would be arguing that your patch system still fails. It doesn't. Your engineers fixed it. I'm giving them credit for that. I'm telling the bank exactly what the review shows." Dana asked Halcyon's outside counsel whether the audit committee had completed its governance response. The lawyer hesitated, then said the special committee had met that morning. Charles closed his eyes. One of the independent directors spoke for the first time. "Mr. Cross, before this meeting began, the committee voted to place Evan on administrative leave pending final board action." Evan turned toward his father. "You knew?" Charles did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was tired rather than angry. "I knew you were told the test failed. I knew Maya explained why she couldn't sign. I did not know you had instructed people to rewrite the timeline until the committee showed me the messages." Evan looked around the room as if someone might rescue him. No one did. National Meridian did not terminate the entire relationship that day. That would have made for a cleaner revenge story, but real companies do not make billion-dollar decisions for dramatic effect. We gave Halcyon 60 days to appoint independent compliance leadership, implement board-level reporting, complete new testing, and demonstrate that no commercial executive could alter security evidence. They met most of the requirements. They failed the governance review because 3 additional executives had participated in the cover-up. National Meridian terminated the $3.6 billion migration agreement under the Integrity Clause and moved the project to 2 competing vendors. Halcyon survived, but it shrank. Evan resigned before the board could formally remove him. His father stepped down as CEO at the end of the quarter. The company's engineers did not all lose their jobs, and I was glad for that. The people who had done honest work deserved better than to become collateral damage in somebody else's lesson. A week after the contract termination became public, Daniel waited for me outside my office building. He did not look ruined. He had found another product management job at a smaller software company. That almost made his apology easier to hear because I knew he was not there asking me to rescue him. "I was a coward," he said. "I thought if I stayed close to Evan I'd be safe. Then I watched him do the same thing to everyone who questioned him. I believed him. I also believed he was sorry. When he asked whether there was any chance for us, I told him, 'I forgive you. I just don't trust you with my future.'" He nodded, and for once he did not argue. We walked in opposite directions. By winter, my family's problems had become less dramatic and more real. Northline never received the subcontract, and Trevor could not replace the projected revenue quickly enough to support the expansion he had financed. He did not go to prison. No federal agents kicked down his door. He did what thousands of overextended small business owners have had to do. He laid off employees, surrendered a leased server facility, negotiated with his lender, and sold most of the equipment he had purchased before he had a signed contract. The presentation that mentioned my role became an issue during restructuring, but because he had not forged my signature or claimed I had guaranteed the loan, his attorney was able to correct the record without turning it into something worse. My mother and stepfather could not sustain the refinanced mortgage after my monthly support ended. They listed the house. The first time my mother told me they were selling, she cried so hard that I nearly offered to restart the payments out of habit. Instead, I drove over, sat at the same dining table where they had demanded that I apologize to Evan, and listened. My stepfather had taken a part-time estimating job with a local contractor. My mother had increased her nursing shifts as much as her knee allowed. They had found a smaller townhouse 20 minutes away with a payment they could actually manage. There was still a gap. My mother finally said, "If you covered the second mortgage for 6 months, we could keep the house." I asked her, "And after 6 months?" She looked down. "We'd figure something out." I had heard that sentence before. I took her hand. "Mom, I love you. I'm not paying for this house anymore." Her fingers stiffened inside mine. She asked whether I was still punishing them. "No," I said. "That's why I came. I'll pay for the moving company. I'll cover the deposit on the townhouse. I'll help you review the budget if you want me to. But I will not keep financing a house you can't afford so everyone can pretend nothing has to change." My stepfather surprised me by nodding. My mother cried again, but this time she did not call me selfish. Trevor arrived 20 minutes later. He looked exhausted. For months we had barely spoken except through tense phone calls. He sat across from me and said, "I blamed you because it was easier than admitting I spent money I didn't have." I waited. He continued, "I thought the contract was guaranteed because Evan kept telling me it was. I also thought, because you were there, nothing could really go wrong. That was the closest anyone in my family had come to saying the truth. They had not just depended on my money. They had depended on my competence so completely that they stopped thinking about what would happen if I refused to clean up the next mistake." I said, "I should never have let everyone believe I would always fix it." My mother looked at me sharply, maybe expecting an apology. I gave her something different. "Helping you was my choice. Expecting it forever was yours." No one spoke for a while. Then Trevor asked if I would look at a plan for a smaller version of Northline. I told him I would look at it as his sister, not as an investor, not as a guarantor, and not as someone who could get him contracts. He agreed. That spring, My mother and stepfather moved into the townhouse. They hated it for the first month. By the third, my mother admitted she liked not worrying about the roof, the yard, or the giant payment. Trevor restarted his business with 4 employees instead of 23 and focused on local healthcare clients he could actually support. We did not become a perfect family. Some dinners were awkward. Some old resentments came back. But for the first time, when my mother asked whether I was coming over on Sunday, she did not follow the question with a bill. A year after the morning Evan Cross fired me, I was standing in a National Meridian conference room watching a new vendor present its security architecture. The company's chief executive was there, along with a young engineer who had built most of the system. Halfway through the presentation, the CEO interrupted her twice and tried to answer a question she clearly understood better than he did. I watched her close her mouth and look down at her notes, and I recognized the expression immediately. When the CEO finished, I turned back to the engineer and said, "I'd like to hear your answer." She looked surprised. Then she explained the control in 3 clear sentences and pointed out a limitation the executive had failed to mention. It was not a fatal flaw. It was honest information, and honest information is what lets smart people make good decisions. After the meeting, Dana caught up with me in the hallway. "You know," she said, "1 year ago today you were carrying a cardboard box out of Halcyon." I laughed. I had forgotten the date. She had not. "Best cardboard box I ever owned," I said. She smiled and walked away. I stood for a moment looking through the windows at the Chicago River below. I did not own a corporate empire. I had not bought my parents' house. I had not bankrupted anyone in secret. I had not needed to. Evan lost his position because he believed authority could change facts. Halcyon lost the contract because its leaders tried to hide evidence instead of fixing a governance failure. Daniel lost our relationship because when pressure arrived, he chose proximity to power over loyalty. Trevor lost money because he spent against a promise instead of a contract. My parents lost a house they could no longer afford because they borrowed against tomorrow and assumed I would keep paying for yesterday. I did not create those consequences. For years, I had simply been standing between the people I loved and the full weight of their own decisions. The hardest thing I ever did was move out of the way. My life became quieter after that. I still worked long hours, but not because I was trying to prove I deserved a seat at someone else's table. I ran a team of people who knew that bringing me bad news early would never cost them their jobs. I rented an apartment I liked instead of buying something enormous to demonstrate that I had won. I went running by the lake on Saturday mornings. I dated eventually, carefully. I called my mother because I wanted to hear her voice, not because I was checking whether she had paid the mortgage. I met Trevor for coffee once a month, and when he told me he had landed a modest 3-year hospital contract, I was proud because I knew he had earned it without using my name. The failed security test that started everything was repaired in less than 2 days. That still makes me smile sometimes. 2 days. That was all Evan had needed to wait. Instead, he decided that the person telling him no was the problem, and in doing so, he exposed every weak relationship and every bad assumption surrounding me. At the time, being fired felt like a door slamming in my face. A year later, I understood it differently. Sometimes the most important door in your life is the one someone closes because they are certain you will come back and beg them to open it. I never went back. I found out I had been carrying the key to somewhere better the whole time.